Hi guys, I'm not going to turn on my camera today. Excuse me. I'm not sure if my face is swollen or not, but it feels swollen because of all the pain I have from, my sinuses. And, I don't want you seeing a swollen face, so I'm just not going to turn on my camera. But we are going back to Rabbi Toby Singer's Let's Get Biblical, Volume 1. And today we're talking about the passion narrative being decimated. Now, in case you don't know what the passion narrative is, and I suspect you do, but just in case you don't, the passion narrative is, Jesus' trial and everything from his trial to his death on the cross. So that's what the passion narrative is. All right. And this is all coming from the Gospels because we only know of the passion narrative from the Gospels. We don't know it from anywhere else, which is very sus because the later Gospels use Mark. I'll accept John, but John's like a whole nother thing. But John came much, much later. So, anyway. Okay. So let's see how the Bible decimates itself with the passion narrative. First of all 4 of the Gospels talk about the passion. And believe it or not, Christians, believe it or not, there are a lot of inconsistencies. And these inconsistencies, unlike what your pastors say, cannot be easily dismissed. Christians who believe the inerrancy of the New Testament are unnerved by the discrepancies found in the gospel accounts. So while the parishioners may not know about these discrepancies because they listen to their leaders, the leaders definitely know, and they are. Now listen, if you're a Christian, you need to listen very carefully. If you think that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, your leaders are tricking you. Hey, scapegoat. And they're doing it knowingly. Now, I might have some tolerance if they didn't know, but they know, okay? They know. And they're lying to you. And that's just one of the things they lie about. Okay, moving on. The last Matthew, Mark, and Luke claim that the Last Supper was a Passover Seder, the Passover lamb and whatnot. Um, that's what the Seder is. Yeah, I agree, Scapegoat. I agree. So that's what the Seder is. Just in case you didn't know. I'm not trying to insult your intelligence or anything. I'm just trying to, make this as clear as I can. Okay, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke claim that the Last Supper was a Passover Seder and Jesus was crucified on the first day of Passover or the 15th of Nisan. In contrast, there is no Passover Seder in the book of John because, according to this gospel, Jesus was crucified on the Passover. And if you've ever read John, you know this to be true. John views Jesus as the Passover lamb. That is why he changed it. So, hang on, I lost my place here. Okay, in sharp contrast, there is no Passover Seder in the book of John. According to this last gospel, Jesus was not crucified on Passover. Rather, Jesus was crucified on the day before Passover, the 14th of Nisan. This is the day that the Passover lambs were sacrificed. In essence, all four Gospels agree Jesus was crucified on Friday, but they cannot agree on which day of the month this occurred. And this is a very big problem because we all know that. Hey, Selena, I'm sorry, sweetie. I thought I chose to. Um, we all know that you can't have a Friday being both the 13th and the 14th, or the 14th and the 15th, whatever. You know what I mean? In the same year. That's impossible. Okay, moving on. So this raises a lot of questions, as if I didn't give you a lot to think about already. Oh, it's okay, Selena. I just went live about 9 minutes ago. Okay. How did the stories develop? How did they get the date wrong? That's a pretty serious thing. If you're building up your entire religion on this dude, you would think they could at least get the date right. Hey, Big Zebra. The significance of these inconsistencies are inconsequential when we examine. So they're not inconsequential, but there are problems that are more consequential. So the date thing, yeah, that's pretty damning. But we're gonna get into more things that are damning. In Mark, the oldest and least embellished of the Gospels, Jesus is portrayed as troubled and emotionally lost as he faced death. Mark tells us that following the Last Supper, Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane in unbearable agony, and he depicts Jesus as in the throes of despair and loneliness. As his execution draws near, he is distressed and faltering as he cries over his fate. Mark produced a despondent portrait of Jesus, who began to be troubled even unto death as he fell to the ground in anguish. In this gospel, Jesus is traumatized and mournful and asks his followers to keep him company while pleading with God 3 times to take this cup from him, meaning his death. As Jesus is on the cross, he's desperate and bewildered as Jesus cries, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Here, Jesus is broken, dumbfounded, and utterly confused by his predicament. Mark borrowed this phrase from King David in Psalm 22 and placed him in the mouth of Jesus. Okay, so on to the book of Luke. So what does Luke have to say? Well, Luke says, and keep in mind, Luke was written about 15 years after Mark, about 85 CE. And he borrowed a lot from Mark. In fact, over half of Luke's gospel is borrowed from Mark. But Luke's author was so disappointed by Mark's portrayal of Jesus that he had to fix it. Because of course he did, right? Of course he did. Can't have the Son of God being a crybaby, right? Luke went to great lengths to counter this weak view of Jesus, and he accomplished his task by expunging the passion from the passion narrative. So Luke's like, you know what? Fuck all this. We can't have Jesus being weak. So Luke eliminates the aforementioned passages of Jesus' distress and anguish. Texts like "My soul is deeply troubled, even unto death," disappeared in Luke. Jesus also doesn't fall to the ground in Luke. Instead, Jesus is stalwart as he prays on his knees. There's no trace of Jesus whining about his impending death in Luke because its author stripped away any trace of Jesus' distress and suffering from his story. By the way, it also strips away any humanity that Jesus might have been cloaked with in the book of Matthew or in the book of Mark. Sorry. Brain fart. Because we're going to a more divine idea of Jesus. In Mark, he seems more of a man who could do miracles. And in Luke, starting with Luke, we see, hey, Marianne, we see that this changes and morphs. Because remember, according to Luke's gospel, he's the actual Son of God. All right. Luke's Jesus tells a group of wailing women as he is led to the crucifixion, "Weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and your children." No other gospel mentions this but brief but significant anecdote. My eyes are really dry. Sorry about that. In Mark, Jesus cries out 3 times, asking God to take this cup from him. But in Luke, Jesus remains calm and steady and asks God only to remove the cup 1 time. However, this entire scene has an almost business-like feel to it. Luke is able to paint this confident portrait of Jesus, completely at peace with his own death, by bracketing this request with an important condition: "If it be your will, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done." So Luke's Jesus has no fear of death. Mark's Jesus, on the other hand, is mocked, broken, anguished, and bewildered because God has forsaken him. As he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In Luke's version, Jesus is completely lucid and in control. Only in Luke, Jesus promises one of the 2 thieves, "Today you shall be with me in paradise." In Matthew's story, neither of the thieves believed in Jesus. Most importantly, instead of Mark's cry of dereliction, Luke's Jesus is steady and reserved, and instead of asking God why he's abandoned on the cross, Jesus proclaims at his crucifixion, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Interestingly, both Mark and Luke quote the Psalms, yet whereas Mark cites a desperate passage from Psalm 22, Luke quotes Psalm 31, a chapter that conveys confidence and victory. So Luke's like, I don't like it that Mark's Jesus is a crybaby. So even though I'm copying a lot from him, I'm gonna fudge the story. Okay, only in Luke can we find Jesus sweating blood. And this is the only exception to the stalwart Jesus that we find in Luke, okay? And it doesn't even appear in the earliest and best manuscripts we have. Gee, imagine that. Christians lying for Jesus. Imagine that. Oh, this is interesting. I didn't know this. These verses were therefore omitted by the Revised Standard Version, and their validity is questioned in the margins of many Christian Bibles, including the New International Version, the New King James Version, and the New English Bible. So where did it come from? Well, it was later interpolated into the book of Luke, we assume. by scribes who opposed the decimated Christian groups that flourished in the first centuries. Docetic derives from apparition. The early Docetic Christian groups, such as the Marcionites and Gnostics, taught that what appeared to be Jesus' body was actually an illusion, his ghost, in other words. They believed Jesus could not have been the product of a world which was created by the God of the Jews, whom they loathed. They insisted Jesus was so divine that he could not really have human characteristics. He only appeared to be human. I've heard that before. The opponents of the Marcionites and Gnostics inserted Luke 22:43-44 in order to show that, contrary to their claims, Jesus was a human who experienced real human emotions displayed by sweating blood and agony. And yeah, there is such a thing as sweating blood and agony, but you have to be damn far down in agony to do that. Therefore, Luke's portrayal of the arrest scene stresses Jesus' humanity to the Docetic Christians. This pattern that Jesus was confident in his last hours is pushed further in the book of John, written 15 years after the book of Luke, or thereabouts. All right. Hang on, I lost my place. Okay. Mark's portrait is of a frail and anguished Jesus. And, of course, Christians can't have a frail Jesus, a whiny baby Jesus. They have to have a strong Jesus. The 2nd century pagan scholar Celsus, a well-known critic of Christianity, assesses this portrayal when he asks, why does Jesus howl, lament, and pray to escape the fear of destruction, expressing himself in a manner like this, "O Father, if it is possible, let the cup pass"? Yeah, I know, right? Luke's narrative was fashioned to address these criticisms. Okay. So now we're going back to Tanakh. This will all make sense, I promise. But we're going back to Tanakh and see why all of this is not only unnecessary, but un-Jewish. Now, we've already talked about the sin offering. You know, the sin offering, which carried the sins of Israel, was not sacrificed. The high priest put, symbolically, the sins of Israel on the sin offering, and let it go out into the wilderness. So the sin offering was not sacrificed. So what does Tanakh have to say about this? Well, let's find out. Deuteronomy 4:32 to 40. It doesn't have it here. So let me pull that up. Just a minute. Okay. So 432. Ask now about the former days, long before your time, from the day God created human beings on the earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other, has anything so great as this ever happened, or has anything like it ever been heard of? Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire as you have and lived? Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another nation by testing, signs, and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, or by great and awesome deeds, like all the things the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Beside him there is no other. From heaven he made you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words from out of the great fire. Because he loved your ancestors and chose their descendants after them, he brought you out of Egypt by his presence and his great strength, to drive out before you the nations greater and stronger than you, and to bring you into their land, and to give it to you for your inheritance as it is today. Acknowledge and take to heart this day that the Lord God is in heaven above and on the earth beneath. There is no other. Keep his decrees and commands, which I am giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, and you may live long in the land the Lord your God gives you for all time. I'm sorry, Wist. Yeah, Wist, my dad died in March, and I'm still having a hard time, so, you know, it's it's hard. It is. I'm getting through it with counseling and medicine. And I'm not saying that's what you need. All of us are different. But, you know, all of us are different. You may need medication, you may not. And, you know, Wiz, if you go to the doctor and you do need medication, don't be afraid to take it, man. Do not be afraid to take it. That's what it's there for. Hang on just a minute. I had my blanket on my legs because it's starting to get a bit not well, yeah, it's starting to get chilly in the morning here, and then it starts to warm up in the afternoon. So yeah. So anyway, um yes, we have all gone through a bunch of shit in the last 2 years. I agree with you. Okay, so let's get off of that and go on to what was the oral Torah and why was it later committed to writing? A perfect text must be unambiguous, requiring no additional information to be understood. Since the Torah is perfect, now these are his words, okay? And Rabbi, if you're listening to this, I totally respect your religion, man. I do. Um, it's not you. It's Christianity I have a problem with. Okay, so you know, I totally respect your religion. Um, so even though I slice and dice Tanakh up and down on my Saturday live stream, I'm doing it from the perspective of a um, former fundamentalist Christian and not from a Jewish perspective. I would probably have a lot better understanding if I could approach it from the Jewish perspective. So, just wanted to tell you that, man. I do, I wholeheartedly support freedom of religion. I wholeheartedly support freedom of religion. Okay, so back to this. Since the Torah is perfect, the Torah must not contain any ambiguities. The written Torah, however, is pregnant with startling ambiguities. Oh, that's surprising that the rabbi would admit that. But I think the Muslims have something along the same line. I'm not sure. I'm not too familiar with Islam, but I think the Muslims think that the Quran is perfect in oral form, but not written form. I think. Um, all 613 commandments are identified in the written Torah. You hear that, Christians? There's not just 10 commandments, there's 613. 613. The oral Torah supplies the necessary detailed information that has enabled this throughout Jewish history to perform these commandments. Originally, the oral law was not transcribed, but transmitted from father to son and teacher to disciple, the system used to convey these ideas of sacred oracles was radically changed approximately 1800 years ago. Okay, so what happened about 1800 years ago? 1800 years ago would have been around 200 CE, give or take. So the Jews weren't really doing so hot in 200 CE. So that's probably why it changed. That's my guess. And I could be wrong, but that would be my guess. My guess is it changed because there was no way for it to be conserved if it wasn't written down. That's my best guess. A revolutionary innovation was carried out by the central leader of the Jewish community during the Roman occupation of Judea. This reform was enacted by Rabbi Judah the Prince, who was a direct descendant of the royal line of King David. Fearing the oral tradition might be forgotten, because, again, we're talking about around 200 CE, around the time that the Jews were fighting the Romans. The rabbi assembled scholars of his generation and undertook the compiling of the oral law in what became known as the Mishnah, from the Hebrew word which means repetition. The Mishnah consists of 63 tractates codifying Jewish law, which are the basis of the Talmud. Okay, so basically, if I'm hoping to have the rabbi on, but if I understand this correctly, the Torah are the commandments, or as we know them, the 5 books of Moses. The Talmud are the oral teachings of the Jews that tell people how to keep Torah. If I understand correctly. Okay. Talmud was written in Aramaic, while the Mishnah was written in Hebrew. And they were edited approximately 600 CE. The sages collected their traditions and compiled them into the Jerusalem Talmud in approximately 450 CE. Since that time, the oral law has ceased to be oral. As time passed, under harsh conditions of the Roman Empire, more and more of the previous oral tradition was recorded. For many centuries prior to this period, only the Torah appeared as a sacred written script. Many verses in Torah require explanation and interpretation, which is why we have the Talmud. That's the interpretation. Many terms are used in Torah that are undefined or incomprehensible and therefore they have to have explanations or instructions, assuming familiarity on the part of the reader. The significance of the oral law is that it was a result of a long chain dating back to the revelation at Mount Sinai, and its teachings are binding and authoritative. The following are just a few examples of where Torah does not supply the necessary information which would explain how to fulfill these ordained commandments. Moses instructed Jewish people to perform kosher slaughter as I have commanded you. Yet nowhere in the written text of the Torah do we find a hint as to how to do a kosher slaughter. The Torah states that it is a law for all time, throughout all ages, in all your settlements. You must not eat any fat or any blood. Well, there's a bunch of types of fat. Which fat was you referring to? The Ten Commandments states that it is forbidden to perform any work on Sabbath. Okay, what exactly is work? So you can see, questions just piling up, which is why they have the Talmud. So the Torah are the laws, and the Talmud is basically expounding on these laws, how to keep the laws, yada, yada, yada. Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, the holiest and most solemn day of the year. Its central theme is atonement and repentance. Jews traditionally observe this holy day with a 25-hour period of self-introspection and intense prayer, spending most of the day in synagogue services. In Leviticus 16, 29, 27, 23, 27, and Numbers 29, 7, the Torah mandates establishment of this holy day on the 10th day of the 7th month as the Day of Atonement for sins. It is called the Sabbath of Sabbaths, and a day upon which we are commanded to afflict your souls. Furthermore, Torah warns the penalty for violating this commandment. For any person who is not afflicted in soul on that same day shall be cut off from his people. Scripture explicitly states that it is a capital crime to transgress this commandment. But that's kind of, I don't know, what is that exactly? What is that? Yeah, they do list. The oral law conveys the essential information. The Mishnah explains the commandment to afflict your souls. That entails 5 specific prohibitions. So this is where Mishnah is important. So Torah is the law, Mishnah is an explanation of the law. Where are we? Oh. So, and as we've said before, the oral law predates the written Torah. Okay. The rabbi is a Jew. So, he can believe whatever he wants because I believe in freedom of religion. I'm not so sure that oral Torah predates written Torah, although it might. It might. I don't know. So I'm just going to leave it at that. So, what is the church's attitude toward the oral law, Christianity? Well, let's find out. We all know what it is. You don't have to follow the law, just the 10 Commandments. Well, there's a lot more than 10 Commandments. Virtually all Christian denominations reject the oral Torah, generally regarding it with contempt. The New Testament clearly attests that the earliest Christians took the Mosaic origin of the law for granted, never questioning its authenticity and authority. That's because the earliest Christians were Jews. Just wanted to pop that out there. Josephus identifies 3 Jewish sects in the first century: the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. While there are different regarding the precise beliefs of the Essenes, this relatively small apocalyptic reclusive group is not mentioned in the Christian Bible, and to some extent was ignored until the 20th century. However, the Essenes have gained favor in modern times as a result of the discovery of an extensive group of religious documents found in 1947 known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. The other 2 major sects were the Pharisees and Sadducees, whose core beliefs were well known and widely documented. The furious conflicts between these sects took place in context of the broad social and religious issues which dated back to the 2nd century BCE, when the Sadducees began. The discord was further exacerbated by the Roman conquest. The final and most significant clash was theological and centered on different interpretations of the Torah and how to apply it to current Jewish life. The Sadducees recognized only the written Torah and vehemently opposed the oral tradition. They claimed the soul is not immortal and insisted there is no afterlife or rewards or penalties after death, and rejected the belief in the resurrection of the dead. Each of these tenets of the Sadducees were discarded, and the widespread Pharisaic community. Josephus records that the Pharisees received backing and goodwill of common people, unlike the more elite Sadducees. The Pharisees claimed Mosaic authority for interpretation of scriptures, while Sadducees represented the authority, the priestly privileges, and the prerogatives of priesthood. Class struggle ain't nothing new, people. Following the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, the Pharisees produced the normative traditional Judaism, which is the basis for contemporary forms of Judaism. Excuse me. The Sadducees, who were the main Jewish antagonists of the Pharisees, became extinct sometime after the destruction of Herod's temple in 70 CE. Okay, so that covered more than just the passion. But at any rate, yeah, the Bible itself decimates the passion. The Bible itself decimates the passion. Why? No fucking clue. You'd think that if they wanted people to take this seriously, they'd at least try to, I don't know, make it uniform. That's the least you can do, right? But they don't. I mean, anybody with half a brain can tell that the New Testament walks all over itself. Now, I have not read the Talmud, so, the Talmud might explain the seeming different um, contradictions of Tanakh, or at least the oral law, and let's not forget, we are reading Tanakh in translation, so that also might have something to do with it. It also might have something to do with it because there's no one-on-one translation. If you've ever learned a second language, hey, Limited, if you've ever learned a second language, you know this. There's never going to be a one-on-one correlation. The the best you can do when you're translating something is the best you can do. You know, I know that's a tautology, but um, in other words, you know, I may choose a different word. Like if I'm translating from French to English or from German to English, I may choose different words in my translation than somebody else does. And it's not necessarily that we're trying to change the message, because we're not. It's just the way languages are. It's just the way languages are. So, I'm not faulting the translators. Although there is some hanky panky going on with the translating, I do have to be upfront and honest about that. There's hanky panky going on, especially in Tanakh, with the translation. But it's not as much as some people would like to believe. And a lot of it is unintentional. Some of it is intentional, some of it's not. So, I do not read Hebrew, so I can't tell you what was intentionally changed and what may be a translational error. But, you know, um, at any rate, thank you guys for coming. I'm sorry I wasn't here at 12. I thought I had put down 2 as the time, which is why I'm here right now. So, anyway, why don't you hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed? hit that thumbs up button. Leave a comment down below for the algorithm. I read all your comments. Whether or not I respond to them is another thing entirely. But I do read them all. And, if you're financially able, you can join this channel for as low as 99 cents a month. And you can help make this channel better. And until next time, folks, goodbye and have a great day.